So future educators, your discussion is focused on different classifications of assessment. So perhaps on the previous lessons that we came to realize about formative assessment, then we have your summative assessment as the two major types of assessment. But right now, we will be talking about the different classifications based on different categories. So we hope that by the end of this lesson, you will be able to illustrate scenarios in the use of different classifications of assessment, rationalize the purpose of the different kinds of assessment, and decide on the kind of assessment that you will be using, given an example of a scenario of a student that you will be handling. Now, guys, if you would look at this topic, no, it's summarized in this outline. If you can take a screenshot of that, okay, so this is basically the different types of assessment based on purpose, based on form, based also on function, kind of learning, the ability, and then the interpretation of learning. So there are 6 major categories there. And then under each category, there is 2 types. No? For example, under purpose, you have educational and psychological. Now, let's discuss them one by one. So under purpose, when you talk about assessment, your assessment could be either educational, it could also be psychological. Now, when you talk about educational, one important keyword here perhaps that you need to remember is education. And when I say educational assessment, it is being done in the school setting, and it tracks the growth of your learners. And then as discussed, your educational assessment could either be formative, it could also be summative type of assessment. Okay, so when you talk about educational assessment, it would include, for example, in your cases, you're having quizzes. For example, you are having prelim examinations. You're also having midterm examinations, and you're also having final examinations. Those are all examples of educational assessment. Or for example, if you will have your demonstration, let's say for example, for your PE subject, you have your demonstration, let's say your dance demonstration for that matter, or maybe you would have your sports, your games at the end of the semester. Those are referred to as educational assessment. One way perhaps for us to look at this is that anything that is graded by the teacher could actually be considered as an educational assessment. Okay, anything that is to be graded at school is considered to be educational assessment. Now, here comes the term parallelism, no, which is introduced under this concept. When I say, guys, parallelism, ito lang yung main point ng parallelism. No? When we talk about parallel lines, di ba class, parallel lines are lines that are going towards the same direction. They are lines that go together, however, they do not meet, no? Kasi kapag nag-meet, perpendicular line na yan. But anyway, when you talk about parallel, okay, when you talk about parallel, the main point there is that they're going towards the same direction. Okay, they're going towards the same direction. Now, what do we mean here by having parallelism in educational assessment? Plus, ang ibig sabihin lang yan is that whenever, for example, you have a summative assessment, there should be formative assessment that would come with that. Okay? And dapat, the same yung goal nila. A very good example perhaps is during your PE classes. Halimbawa kung sa PE, no, may subject kayo, for example, dance, or maybe rhythmic exercises, and then one of your summative assessment, di ba, kadalasan nagbibigay tayo ng terminal requirement. And when I talk about terminal requirement, the tendency is that your terminal requirement is a summative assessment. Okay? So kadalasan sasabihin, after the finals, you need to present a dance number. Okay? And the dance number will be the application of all the rhythmic exercises, all the rhythmic movements that we have discussed. Yan yung summative assessment. How would I apply parallelism? Plus, pag sinabi kong parallelism, dapat may formative assessment din ako that would help the student perform during the summative assessment. Ano pong example? Di ba kung na-notice sa PE classes, sasabihin, okay, today is practice time. But when I say practice time, it is not a time for you to tell your students na, okay, you go home and you practice. Hindi po ganon. dapat pag sinabi nating practice bilang teacher, nandyan ka. Kumbaga, tuturuan mo sila, titingnan mo if who among your students are having difficulty to perform the dance number, and you gradually guide them. That's the purpose of parallelism. When we say class parallelism, the formative assessment and the summative assessment would have the same goal. Okay, they have class the same goal, and then the formative assessment is used to assist the student in order to reach towards the summative assessment. Okay, yan po yung ibig sabihin ng parallelism. Now, in simple classroom setting, for example, halimbawa, nagbibigay ako ng, okay, let's take for example our subject. If you can notice our summative assessment, let's say for example, your prelim examinations are all multiple choice. If I would want to apply the concept of parallelism as part of the formative assessment, I should also use multiple choice items. Hindi pa pwede class, for example, na during the quizzes, halimbawa, during the quizzes, I will be using all identification. Pagkatapos, during the major exam, all multiple choice. You will be shocked. Okay? Masashock ka. Ay, ganito pala yung multiple choice ni sir. Ganito pala yung type ng exams na ginagamit niya. Akala ko puro identification lahat. Okay? So, it tells us that whatever you are doing in summative assessment, it should have been supported by your formative assessment. And that should be able to guide your students in order to perform the summative assessment well. Now, let's go to your psychological assessment. Class, pag sinabi nating psychological assessment, it talks about the cognitive and non-cognitive characteristics of the individual. It also talks about your affective characteristics. Now, can anybody give me an example? Can you give me an example of cognitive, non-cognitive, or even affective characteristics that we can assess? Sige nga, even in chat, or you can unmute your microphone, give me an example of these characteristics that we can assess. Anybody? Sige na, I am waiting. Give me examples of cognitive, non-cognitive, and affective characteristics that we can measure. Yes. Jaina, can you say something about that? None. Mary Hart, how about Mary Hart? Yes, somebody has mentioned intelligence. Colette, thank you for that. Okay, so intelligence is an example of cognitive characteristic. What else? Yes, others. How about, okay, he's thinking. Cognitive daw would include perseverance, okay? If I would look at perseverance, I would not argue with you, Kim, no? I would not argue with that. But if I would look at perseverance, it is more of affective. It is more of affective. But then you are correct that it is measured under psychological. Sige, reasoning could also be cognitive, okay? Reasoning, okay? Knowledge is there. Somebody has mentioned critical thinking. Okay, those are examples, guys, of cognitive, no? Those are examples of cognitive characteristics, okay? Now, if you would look at naman affective, when you say affective class, what's your keyword for affective? When I say affective, does it pertain to knowledge or does it pertain to emotions? When I say class affective, does it pertain to knowledge or does it pertain to emotions? So class, tama. When I say affective, oftentimes they pertain to our emotions. Oftentimes, class, they pertain to our feelings. And one example of that, as Colette here has shared, is motivation. And then you also have attitude for that matter. And then we also have your personality. Okay, those are the common examples of your psychological test. Now, true, false, or trolls. No? Oftentimes we will hear this. People who are taking psychological tests are psychotic. People who are taking psychological tests are psychotic. True or false? When I talk about psychological tests, okay, if you're taking the psychological test, are you considered to be psychotic or mentally ill? Sige na, true or false? Okay, all people taking psychological tests are considered to be psychotic. Yes. Heart is affirm on the answer false. How about others? What do you think? True or false ba yon? Okay? No at saka false. Yung iba naman, sige na, I would want to hear your ideas and I would want to see your responses. Okay? When I talk about psychological test, is it intended for a person who is mentally incapacitated? Or is it only intended incapacitated for people with mental health challenges? Okay, so you are correct that is false. So why am I emphasizing that? Because many times, for example, no, when they will say, person A will take a psychological test, ang tendency ng iba is mag-iisip, bakit nabubuang na ba yan? Kaya ano bang problema sa pag-iisip niyan? Okay? Guys, when we note of psychological test, look at this motivation. Okay? That's not about insanity. That's not about being psychotic. Okay? It's just about evaluating whether a person is motivated or not. For example, now, there are colleges that would require psychological test. Okay? I'm not so sure in your case, but there are colleges class that would require psychological test. And on the affective part of psychological test, there is a psychological test that would be able to determine the risk of the student, okay, the risk of the student for example, suicide, the risk of the student for depression, and the risk of the student, for example, for non-compliance. Okay, non-compliance. I'm so sorry for opening up topics like this. If you need help on this, you let me know also. But anyway, so class, for example, there's this psychological test that would be able to detect the risk for depression. Class, oftentimes the students, the learners, will be afraid. Anong isasagot ko dito? Baka mamaya, lalabas na depressed ako tapos hindi ako maa-accept sa college. Or there are others that would say, let's answer this para hindi tayo magiging depressed. You know what? That is not how you take psychological test. When you are taking psychological test, you answer the questions the way you know it, and the first thing that would come into your mind by the time that you read the question. Okay? Huwag kang mag-isip kung anong tama at saka maling sagot. Why? If you are taking a psychological test, is there a correct answer, dear students? Future educators, is there a correct answer in the psychological test? Okay, is there a correct answer in the psychological test? Others, yes, I would want to see your responses. Heart, thank you for your response. How about others? Pag sinabi kong psychological test, may tamang sagot ba, guys? Okay, wala. Okay, wala. There's no correct answer there. And you just need to be true and be honest to yourself, or else, class, you are altering. You might make the result of the test inconsistent. Okay? Anong ibig kong sabihin inconsistent? For example, first part parang ang happy mo, bakit sa next part parang depressed ka? Okay? So be true to yourself, because a good test will be able to detect whether you are saying the truth or not. But anyway, going back to my point, for example, class, a diagnostic test or a psychological test that would say risk for depression. Halimbawa, lumabas sa test, lumabas sa test, high risk. Question, as an educator, can I conclude that this student is depressed? Can I conclude based on the result, sabi ng result, nakita mo sa paper, na-analyze ni guidance counselor. The guidance counselor checked already. Tapos lumabas, high risk for depression. Question, as an educator, is it fair to conclude that the child is already depressed? Is it fair to conclude that the child is already depressed? Sige na, I would want to see your responses again. Sabi ng test, after the test results were checked, nakalagay high risk for depression. Is it already a fair conclusion for me to say that this learner is depressed? Okay, kung based daw sa result, yes. Sige, how about others? Sabi ng result, no? Sabi ng result, no? Kakalabas lang ng result, halimbawa, psych test, nakalagay high risk for depression. Now, my question is, can I conclude that this child is depressed? Can I conclude that this child is depressed? Yes or no? Sige. I have seen the answer yes on the chat. How about others na? I would want to hear your ideas. There are no right and wrong answers here. This is formative assessment. So, okay, sige. Many are saying yes. Okay, yes din daw. How about others? Sige na. Yes and yes. Okay. So class, one thing that we need to understand before we can come up with the conclusion is that we need to understand what is the purpose of the test. Okay, we need to understand the purpose of the test. And oftentimes in technical terms, we oftentimes say we need to know the psychometric properties of the test. We need to know the psychometric properties of the test. Okay? Somebody here mentioned, sir, pinapatawag pa sila para i-ask if the results are consistent. Okay? So you're gaining that from experience. So class, pag titingnan natin, the answer to my question, dear fellow educators, is that it's a no. Okay? Plus, pag lumabas sa result na high risk siya for depression, it only pertains risk for depression. It only entails risk for depression. Hindi po yan conclusive na depressed po yung students. Okay? Take note of that. I emphasized the purpose kasi of the questionnaire was to evaluate the risk for depression. In other words, class, risk lang yung ina-evaluate ko. Okay? I did not say that the questionnaire is diagnostic for depression. Again, I did not say that the questionnaire is diagnostic for depression. And I would like to go back to the point shared by your classmate on chat that, sir, they are being called, pinapatawag pa sila para i-confirm if the results are consistent. Yes, that's the next best thing that the guidance counselor would be able to do. Okay? Because class, when I talk about depression, depression could not be simply diagnosed by answering set of questions. It is diagnosed, class, by a set of signs and symptoms that could be found in your DSM. Okay, you have what you call your DSM-5-TR. Right now, it's already the 5th edition. That's why it's 5. No? DSM is diagnostic standards for disease, something like that. I will check the meaning of DSM. But anyway, it's the book that we use in psychiatry in order for us to diagnose whether the patient is having psychiatric problems or psychologic problems. Okay? Now, so again, I would like to make that point. That psychological test that measures risk for depression does not allow us to conclude that the child is indeed depressed. Okay? It only allows us to say that the child is at risk for that, but not depressed for that matter. Now, question, who is the best professional who will be able to diagnose depression? Who is the professional that can diagnose depression? Is it the teacher? Is it the guidance counselor? Is it the psychologist? Or is it the psychiatrist? Sige nga, who is the professional who would best be able to diagnose depression? Is it your teacher? Is it your, what was the second option that I gave? Is it your guidance counselor? Okay, is it your guidance counselor? Is it your psychologist? Or is it your psychiatrist? Responses, please. Okay. Sige, others. The same people are doing the responses. Okay. Sige, I can see correct responses already. So class, the correct is your psychiatrist. Class, the correct there is your psychiatrist. When I say class diagnosed, diagnosis class is usually taken care of by your physician. Your physician, your psychiatrist is a physician that specializes on mental health disorders. Sir, how about psychologist? Plus, your psychologist is more inclined on interpreting human behavior, okay, but their license does not allow them to diagnose depression. Okay. Now, if you would encounter the profession psychometricians, your psychometricians class are best on administration of standardized examinations. Okay, they also aid the psychologist and the psychiatrist, but still it's the psychiatrist who has the license to diagnose. Okay, it's not in our role as teachers. Why am I reminding you that? Because oftentimes there are teachers who would say, Mrs., your child is depressed. Okay, fellow educators, we are not in the position to diagnose our learners as depressed. We are not also in the position to say, Mrs., alam mo yung anak mo may ADHD. Hindi po tayo yung nasa lugar para gawin yan. Okay? When we talk about, for example, ADHD, we can just tell the mother, Mom, we noticed that your child is having difficulty to focus during class. Their tendency is to move to the left, to the right when I am doing my lessons. Okay? Ma'am, I would suggest that you consult a professional. Yun lang yung pwede nating sabihin. Although you will know later on that the signs and symptoms presented by the child is indeed ADHD. But your license as a teacher would only allow you to identify that child and refer that child to the professional. Huwag nating sabihin, halimbawa, pinatawag mo yung parent kasi nga borderline or kasi nga yung performance ng child is marginal. Okay, do not right away confront the mother and tell the mother, Ma'am, yung anak nyo may ADHD. Okay? Class, masashock yung mother and you will not be able to address the stress, the concerns that the mother will be raising to you. And the mother might end up blaming you or the mother might end up feeling guilty about the condition of the child. Okay? So again, it is not in our position to tell the mother about this diagnosis. Yes, Sharon, do you have any question in mind?
No, sir.
Take it. Now, plus, who is the school personnel that can use best these psychological assessments? So the one class that utilizes our psychological assessment is that it's your guidance counselors. It's your guidance counselors who utilize these assessment for them to formulate interventions. Okay, so what do they do, class? They can formulate interventions, okay, that can improve the academic performance of the student along with the social and emotional development. I don't know if you have been a client of the guidance counseling office or the guidance office class, you would notice that they are doing follow-ups. No? They are doing follow-ups. And then let's remove the notion also, and you need to clarify this among your young learners, especially if you're handling elementary and then your elementary and then secondary education. The tendency is that they equate guidance office to discipline. Diba? Ang feeling ng estudyante, hala, pinatawag ako ng guidance, what's my major error in life? No, ganun palagi yung sinasabi or ganun usually yung thinking nila. Ano yung nangyari? Ba't ako pinapatawag ng guidance? Nakakatakot. So as an educator, you need to remove that notion from the brains of your learners. Dapat, class, makita nila that the guidance office is actually there to help them. And take note, we don't only send students to the guidance office because they are not following you, because they have infarcted some rules, or because they are for disciplinary actions. We can actually send students to guidance office if they are just curious. If they just want to ask help, you can let them go to the guidance office. If they don't know how to handle their boyfriend, they can go to the guidance office. If they don't know how to handle their family matters, you can refer them to the guidance office. Okay? It's the guidance office class that will be able to formulate interventions towards the academic career, social and emotional development. That's why if you can recall your guidance officers, their tendency is that they also do follow up. No, kadalasan sasabihin yan, okay, see you next month, update mo ako kung anong nangyayari. Hindi po yan marites mode ng guidance counselor. They are just doing their job. And your guidance counselors class are actually they have that contract with you. They have that unspoken contract with you, class, na everything that you will be sharing is actually private. And anytime class that they will be informing others, they need also to inform you. Okay? So you need to trust them because that's their profession as guidance counselors. So if you will be asked who makes use of psychological test, the one class that makes use of your psychological test is your guidance counselor. Okay? Now, let's talk about according to form. There are two forms here, your paper and pencil test, and then you also have your performance-based test. When I talk about paper and pencil class, its focus is also the cognitive task. In other words, it tells us whether your brain, okay, your brain, especially class the part that talks about recall, understanding, okay, going back to your Bloom's taxonomy, the 6 levels there, the paper and pencil test class will be able to evaluate, okay? Your paper and pencil test will be able to evaluate whether you can recall this task, okay? Whether you can remember the task, you can apply it, analyze it, evaluate it, and create it. That's paper and pencil test. And plus, oftentimes, when I talk about paper and pencil test, it has single answer. Halimbawa, multiple choice. What is the component of the leaf that allows for conversion of energy? Okay, so sasabihin, halimbawa, ano nga ba yung sa ano? Ano nga ba class yung cell in charge of photosynthesis? I myself forgot. Who are the science majors here? What do you call the cell there that's in charge of photosynthesis? Okay, chlorophyll. Okay, it's the chlorophyll. So, pag sinabi natin class paper and pencil, isang sagot lang yan. Or halimbawa, I will tell you, identify the parts of the plant. That's the answer. Okay? Or if we will do matching type, if we will do true or false, that is considered to be paper and pencil. Now, oftentimes when we are making our syllabus or we are making our learning plan, okay, may nakasulat dyan class assessment, okay, assessment type. Okay, one column there would be assessment type. Pagkatapos class, isusulat ni teacher paper and pencil. Now question, can I do paper and pencil test if I am doing online classes? Can I do paper and pencil test when I am doing online classes? Sige na, galawang ba? So, paper and pencil test, pwede ko bang gawin class sa online classes? Yung paper and pencil test. Anybody? Okay, walang sagot. No teacher here. Okay, so very good. Very good. It's a yes. Ha? Class, okay? Class, yes sir, if you're taking down notes. Class, it's not a literal paper and pencil. Okay, it's not literal that you're using paper and you're using pencil. Okay, but it simply means that it acquires single answer. That's your paper and pencil test. And when I talk about performance-based class, no, performance-based, so nagre-require siya class ng performance. Perform task, perform demonstration, gagawa ka ng product. For example, if you are in the engineering, you show strategies. If you are in management, and then you present information in a more complex way. So halimbawa, anong kadalasang ginagawa ng mga teachers dito in the performance-based, no? Okay, you will have essay. That's the most common that is being done by educators. And oftentimes also you will see your teachers who will assign you to do reporting. Okay? Plus those are examples of performance-based assessment. Now, since we've mentioned reporting, no, fellow educators, if you will be asking your students to do reporting, please take note that you need to give feedback about their report. And then as educator, you need to be ready to augment the group in case they need help. For example, I will assign something for RG. I will tell RG, okay, RG, next meeting you try to report about RG, next meeting you report about standardized versus teacher-made assessment. Okay? RG, these are the outcomes that you will be needing. And let's say, for example, RG already prepared the report, and then RG did a presentation which is for 20 minutes. But then during the discussion, if RG forgot something, as a teacher, as their educator, you need to be able to prompt RG. Halimbawa, nakalimutan ni RG kung ano yung standardized assessment. Okay? You can tell RG, okay RG, how would you define teacher-made assessment ba? Tapos sasabihin ni RG, sir, teacher-made as the term implies, gawa po siya ng teacher. Okay, how about naman yung standardized? Kapag babaliktarin mo yung ibig sabihin ng teacher-made, ano kaya yung standardized? Okay, so you are prompting the student. Why am I telling you this? As an educator, it is not possible that your student is reporting and then you are there at the back just sitting down. And worst case scenario, hawak mo pa yung cellphone mo, nagchat-chat ka sa boyfriend at saka sa girlfriend mo. Hindi po dapat yan ang ginagawa ng isang educator. If your students are reporting, you don't also tell your students, uy, very good report. Ay, ang pangit ng PowerPoint. Ay, ang pangit ng pagkaka-deliver. Class, take note that when they are doing reporting, you are not only teaching the reporter, you are supposed also to educate the audience of that reporter. So kapag may problema yung reporter, tulungan mo at saka i-augment mo kung ano yung pagkukulang ng reporter. Okay? That's one important thing that you need to remember. Take note, class, that your student is reporting and you are still the one in charge of that classroom. You are still the one who has the responsibility to handle those students in the classroom. Okay? Hindi po siya sub-teacher mo at hindi po siya yung teacher dyan para na siya lang yung magdi-discuss. Okay? I hope that you will remember that when you are giving reporting as a requirement to your students later on. For example, if you will ask your student to dance, that is also performance-based. If you will ask your student to paint, that is also performance-based. Play musical instrument, that is also performance-based. But take note, when your students will be, for example, doing the painting, you don't just stop there. If you would want to develop your students, okay, if you would want to have a realistic assessment, you need to reinforce the student, for example, by allowing them to present the painting in front. You also allow them to share their ideas in front. How come their drawing came up to be like? Okay, now, few examples first. Class, for example, I have an exam. Last part of the exam, I write there, enumerate the 10 steps in theory development. Enumerate the 10 steps in theory development. Is that considered paper and pencil or performance-based? My question is, enumerate the 10 steps in theory development. How would I categorize that, class? Paper and pencil nga ba yan or performance-based? Okay, others? Sige, I am actually noting down kung sino yung nagre-respond. Sige, so tama, that is paper and pencil. Okay? And why am I giving that as an example? Fellow educators of the future, huwag yung i-label ang last part na essay. Number 1, enumerate the 10 steps in. 10 steps, class, is not essay. That's enumeration. Okay? Next example. I asked the student, how can theory development improve education? How can theory development improve education? Paper and pencil or performance-based? Paper and pencil or performance-based? Okay, correct. That is considered to be performance-based. Now, I asked my students, halimbawa kayo, I will tell you, develop a learning material that will be used in your major subject. Develop a learning material that can be used in your major subject. Is that considered to be paper pencil or performance-based? Develop a learning material that would be used for your subject. That is still considered to be performance-based. Okay? So I hope that you will recall something on that lessons. The succeeding type of your assessment will be discussed in future opportunities.